it's a brain issue, whereas I talk about the fact that it's a whole body issue. And the way I define it is building on Claire Week's work. It's really just a sensitized nervous system. So your nervous system, because of cumulative stress, has become so sensitized because of this stress that's built up little by little over the years, that it's become highly sensitized or fatigued, which means it causes the flight or fight freeze response, which is what it's responsible for, to start to reacting with fear to everyday scenarios or thoughts that you wouldn't normally. And of course, you get a corresponding number of physical symptoms with it, so that you get the same reaction as though there was a tiger in front of you about to eat you, but you might be sitting at home, sitting at your desk. You get this surge of fear. It might be a slow drip of fear, a slow drip of adrenaline. And that's all it is. It's just your poor old tired nervous system because of stress that's been building unbeknownst to you. Most of us don't realize it sort of comes little by little, and it builds up into a point where it sort of crosses that sort of threshold, as I describe in my case, and bang, you get the first exaggerated symptom or weird intrusive thought, or you start to obsess about things a bit more than you would have normally, because your body is being very reactive. It's almost screaming at you to take everything very seriously, to start to latch onto different thought symptoms that perhaps, if your nervous system was calmer and there wasn't this release of adrenaline, that you wouldn't. So it's really simple. It's just a poor old tired nervous system causing you to react to different thoughts, physical symptoms, and then it sort of puts you in a bit of a loop.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another really special episode. We have Samuel Eddy with us. Welcome to the channel.
Thanks, Daniel. Good to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Likewise. And just, so everybody knows, what happened was really, I got a comment on one of the episodes on my YouTube channel saying like, hey, Daniel, you should really talk to Samuel Eddy. And I was like, okay, let me check this out. So I go over to your YouTube channel and I tune into a few episodes. Like, wow, this is great. Like the ideas here are so similar, but I bet they're not identical. So there's always something really valuable that can come from a discussion. So welcome. And firstly, just for people who don't know you, maybe give us kind of like the 2-minute version of like, who's Samuel Eddy and what are you up to?
Well, it's a good question. I guess what I do is I help people recover from anxiety effectively. So often when we think about anxiety, there's a lot of terminology around it. It's fixed, it can't be changed. So I do a lot of work around helping people recover from it so that they can be effectively anxiety free, because that's what I was able to do myself. So I was able to recover from it probably, 12, 15 years ago now. And I realized the help available was, not necessarily great. There's sort of the widespread help available for people who are suffering from anxiety. And when I say anxiety, I mean OCD, panic, etc., all the related states, if you like. So that's what I do. And as you say in YouTube, right, I did a few videos, a few years ago, and then they were getting some traction and people were really liking the format. So I kind of do this, almost full time. I still work in sort of the business corporate world as well. I've got a corporate background. I used to work in marketing, used to flog credit cards for a living. So I've sort of, turned things around, changed how I sort of work and love doing this work, because the relief that people get when they know that they can recover is huge. So, that's kind of why I do what I do, really.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And now you worked in marketing, but I believe you also have some more, let's say, traditional credentials in the counseling field, correct? Is that true?
Yeah, so I did when I was living in the UK, so I'm based here in Melbourne, Australia, but I was living in London for about 10 years, 8 years, I think. And I did a Masters of Science Psychology. So I retrained whilst I was working full time, just did that part time, just to really understand what sort of health circles, what universities, academics were saying around psychology, anxiety, because obviously I had been through it, recovered at that point. So I was really keen to understand how it was. And there were some really fantastic things I learned around different topics around social psychology, more clinical psychology, psychobiology. But I also found, as well-intended as the course was, that there wasn't really anything on offer for those with anxiety from a pure recovery perspective. And there was a huge gap in understanding in terms of how they view these, what I call states. I tend to avoid the mental illness label just because it's just got so many connotations and it can be quite heavy for people. So yeah, so I did that. I'm a mental health first aider in Australia, so I've done those courses too, which are quite clinical in nature. Again, you know, they're okay, well intended, but do they shift the needle for anxiety recovery? Probably not.
Yeah, that's, I think, really looking forward to discussing this more. What you see really shifts the needle and what may not be so helpful. But just to stay a little bit longer on like the origin story, the Samuel Eddy origin story here, at the point that you started taking this course in the UK, you had already recovered. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
So tell us the origin story of like how you started struggling with anxiety and how you came to recover.
Well, it's a good question, and it's funny, I don't talk about it that much just because I don't want to distract people when I'm just through my channel, but it is important to share. So, you know, thanks for asking. I suffered from panic attacks. That was kind of my worst symptom. Most people with anxiety, and again, I know you do a little bit of work in this space too, so maybe, you know, you see it, but a lot of people have their worst thing. There's a trigger that sometimes takes them over what I call this threshold, where the nervous system gets so reactive that you get these really exaggerated symptoms, which we then call anxiety or the anxiety state. So mine was panic. So having panic attacks seemingly out of the blue. I remember being at work one day, sitting at my desk, and I had this sheer dread, this surge of energy come through me, heart racing, and just thinking, whoa, this really odd, strange feeling. And then it just sent me into a panic attack because I was fearful, I was scared. On one level, I probably knew I was just at work and no problem, you know, so why am I so fearful? So I was in London at the time, called my mum back in Australia, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? I was, you know, desperate. And she was useful in helping me identify it was a panic attack at least. And so that kind of set me on this course of, okay, this is anxiety, right? Okay, I'm going to book a counselling session. I'm going to sort it all out, and then I'll be fixed. But of course, that's not what happened. You know, the first person I saw from a counselling perspective just made it worse. You know, again, though, I'm sure they were well-intentioned, but they just said a lot of things that would trigger you into taking what I was already taking very seriously, even more serious. I was, you know, did not understand what I was suffering from or why. I had some maybe inclination because, you know, we hear that, what must be your past. We sort of maybe know that on some level. We hear it. Maybe other people have suffered from stress or depression and, you know, it's about the past. So that I had that inkling, but I was still really fearful of it. So when I saw a counsellor for the first time, they were just, you know, making the whole thing feel very heavy and serious. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is not good. And so then I sort of went on my journey to kind of really understand it, because there was lots of things I did. I did meditation, which was really helpful, but it was a coping technique until I really understood it. So a lot of the work I do now is based on Claire Weekes. So she wrote a couple of books, one Hope and Help for Your Nerves or Self-Help for Your Nerves. Amazing. And she really helped me understand what anxiety was. And so I had probably a year or two when I was kind of in the wilderness. I had no idea what it was. It would sort of go away and it would then come back and I'd be like, oh, okay, it's gone. But I was sort of always doing this, had the fingers crossed going, you know, I hope it doesn't come back. And then of course it would. Inevitably, I had some good coping strategies. I'd always exercise, gym, but I had to sort of keep everything pretty controlled because I just didn't want it to come back, because I still didn't really understand it. Even though I knew I had anxiety, I didn't really know what that meant or why I couldn't get my thinking right. I would have this other symptom of intrusive thoughts, which some people talk about. You know, you just can't get these difficult thoughts out of your head. They come in all the time, obsessive thinking, and it feels really debilitating again when you don't know what it is. So then that sort of set me on this pathway to try and figure out, you know, what the hell was going on and what do I do about it?
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. And by the way, I don't know if you've, you know, checked out our channel or our teachings or whatnot, but basically everything you're saying is, you know, leading to like I can see we have the same understanding, and we would pretty much say that you describe how like anxiety can express itself in the form of like OCSD or panic attacks or intrusive thoughts. And I would just like say insomnia is another one of them. Like it has the same like mechanisms, you know, behind it.
Yeah,
And
well, I had a look at your channel, and you're right. I just love a lot of the titles. I watched a couple of the videos, and yeah, the philosophy or the principles of how you seem to approach sleep is lovely, because you're taking the seriousness out of it, from what I can see.
yes. And speaking of that, my next question for you was, how would you say that, like, the mainstream what the mainstream definition of insomnia or anxiety is, the one that you found not so helpful, and how would you define it in a way that's more helpful?
Yeah, sure. So the mainstream definition is really that it's a mental illness. Now, we might have some variations on that. So I think the mainstream is becoming a bit broader. So there isn't necessarily one fixed definition anymore. But if you think about clinical psychology, which is all trying to align itself to psychiatry, which is all around brain structures, chemical imbalances. So there is still some pervasive narrative that it's because your brain is wired wrong. There's some sort of chemical imbalance that might be genetic or fixed, and therefore you're just kind of wired this way. So it's something that you have to manage for the rest of your life. So it's defined as a mental illness in the sense that you can't stop worrying about the future, can't stop ruminating over the past, for example. Some people may call OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder, the same as anxiety. They might not. I would say it's all caused by the same thing. But it's some sort of brain dysfunction. Now, there is references to the nervous system, which is what I talk about all the time, and a little bit around flight or fight. So I think the narrative is changing in terms of some of the treatments, but it's still pretty clinical in nature, and it doesn't give a lot of hope for people. Well, I often talk about the fact they say it's a neck up issue. So it's all to do with your brain. It's a brain issue, whereas I talk about the fact that it's a whole body issue. And the way I define it is building on Claire Week's work. It's really just a sensitized nervous system. So your nervous system, because of cumulative stress, has become so sensitized because of this stress that's built up little by little over the years, that it's become highly sensitized or fatigued, which means it causes the flight or fight freeze response, which is what it's responsible for, to start to reacting with fear to everyday scenarios or thoughts that you wouldn't normally. And of course, you get a corresponding number of physical symptoms with it. So that you get the same reaction as though there was a tiger in front of you about to eat you, but you might be sitting at home, sitting at your desk, you get this surge of fear. It might be a slow drip of fear, a slow drip of adrenaline. And that's all it is. It's just your poor old tired nervous system because of stress that's been building unbeknownst to you. Most of us don't realize it sort of comes little by little, and it builds up into a point where it sort of crosses that sort of threshold, as I describe in my case, and bang, you get the first exaggerated symptom or weird intrusive thought, or you start to obsess about things a bit more than you would have normally, because your body is being very reactive. It's almost screaming at you to take everything very seriously, to start to latch onto different thought symptoms that perhaps if your nervous system was calmer and there wasn't this release of adrenaline, that you wouldn't. So it's really simple. It's just a poor old tired nervous system causing you to react to different thoughts, physical symptoms, and then it sort of puts you in a bit of a loop. And that's all it is. As highly unpleasant as it is, which is what I say on my videos all the time, because I know there's a lot of fearful people watching. It's not serious, really unpleasant. So we want to acknowledge the suffering, or I want to acknowledge the suffering. That's why I have the channel, because it's hellish at times, but it's not serious. It's all explainable in my view, at least.
Yeah, no, that's super well said. And if I kind of translate to like the language we use, it's very similar. We see it as like, the struggle with sleep, but it applies to anxiety too, comes from our brain kind of like misidentifying things that aren't threats as threats. And it could be like being awake at night, for example, is actually perfectly harmless. But if we start to thinking of that as a threat, then we have this very excited nervous system. We can have all kinds of symptoms from it, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
And now, and we also, like, personally, and I think everybody who follows us agrees that like there is actually no disorder here or illness. As you said, like the kind of mainstream definition says that there's a disorder illness, where we disagree with that and see it more as like, a reactive state, or like a kind of like a misinformed nervous system or brain or something like that. But my next question to you would be like, why would you think some people end up with this this kind of very overactive nervous system, and not others? Because we all have some degree of stress, right? But for some, it is this kind of like real intense struggle, anxiety. For some, not so much. What would you answer to that question?
Yeah, so the way I think about it is that you're right. We all experience stress. We all experience difficult events, life events. Maybe we experience some sort of trauma in life, whether we're aware of it or not. We all go through difficult things. You could argue that we all experience mini traumas or big traumas, and they're all, we sort of I don't like to compare them, because, they're all equally difficult, and it just depends on your circumstances. But we're all going to experience stress. The reason why someone will get sensitized to a point where they go over this sort of threshold and they get these really exaggerated symptoms, which becomes the anxiety state, if you like, is because they just haven't been able to process or release this stress that's accumulated on the nervous system. There haven't been enough outlets for it, or they haven't been able to make sense of what's happened to sort of release it, not internalize it. And so what happens early on in life, again, often we're not aware of it, we just sort of go into protection mode a bit, or we had a difficult experience at school, maybe there was bullying or something, or there's a series of difficult events that happen. And you have to go, and when you're young, particularly as a child, you have no way to deal with these difficult circumstances. You just got to survive, and your flight or fight response is useful to survive. All right, I'm just going to avoid this, I'm going to not do that. And you can still live a perfectly good life, right? You can grow up and you can still, go to university, do a trade, have a family, and you're able to manage it, but it's building. And then you start to live by this survival mode. And then over time, the nervous system gets tired. And so if we don't have the outlets, if we don't recognize what's happening, we might become a bit more closed off, withdrawn. We start to get more fearful of things that we wouldn't normally. Some people, develop a fear of flying and they don't know why, for example. Or it could be some sort of phobia comes in. And so it's just the ability to understand what's happening, be aware of it, and then release, process it. And if we can't do that, over time it just builds to this threshold point, and then the body will let us know that it's had enough. But of course, it gets your attention, right? But in the form of fear. But we misinterpret the message, understandably, because we're just getting a panic attack, and I'm like, I don't know why, or I'm just getting this constant dread, and I don't know why. So we figure, well, this is to do with my thinking. That just must be a problem with my brain. My brain must be wrong, because why am I thinking like this? Whereas we haven't realized what's been building over the years that hasn't been released or processed, again, through no fault of anyone's. Like, we're all just doing our best, but at least once we get to this point, we can go, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
I can see how all this is, when I look at my life circumstances, I can just see how actually, a lot of clients will say to me, I've been anxious all my life, and I just didn't realize it because it was my normal.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And like, bringing it back to what you shared about like the initial session with the counselor not being so helpful. We talked about how the mainstream definition is not so helpful. If we contextualize with what you just shared, we can see that we can have this life experience. So like a lot of stressful things, we develop coping mechanisms. We essentially started to think of things that are not threats as such. And it at some point we reach a level where like we can't kind of hide it or camouflage it anymore. Like we're in such a difficult place. We're in such a threatened state that it becomes like it kind of takes over our life, or becomes a really big part of our life. And then we may see a counselor who says, oh, you have what we call panic disorder. You meet these definitions, and that's a disorder, and you have to do X, Y, Z to at least manage this disorder. What's essentially happening is that we believe even more than before that we are in like a threatening situation, a dangerous situation, something really serious is happening. And the more things we do to kind of try to escape or cope with it, that also reinforces that same narrative that something really serious is happening, right? Would you agree with that?
Totally. Yeah, you sort of walk into the office, right? And it's a bit like this. We're sort of going, oh, gee, and the challenge with health professionals, and again, they're, by and large, all really well intended, But it just depends who you get on the day, what knowledge they have. I remember the first doctor I saw, the GP in the UK, she was lovely, young, but she had to look up in the book what to do with it. But I had this implicit trust in her because I thought, well, if you're unwell, whether it be a physical ailment, a mental ailment, or some challenge, you go to the doctor and they know what to do. You sort of learn this implicit trust. So you're already vulnerable before you even step into the door to their words, whether or not they're good, they're competent, or they're less competent or not. And so you're already on the back foot. And then so sometimes you might get someone who's really helpful, caring, supportive. And even if they are, they might then still, as you so rightly described, they might say you've got this fixed disorder, or that you have PTSD, and then there's another version of PTSD, and then it's complex PTSD. And it's like, whoa. I mean, I've got PTSD, right? And that's post-traumatic stress disorder, if anyone doesn't know, which is, I would say, just anxiety. But if I've got the complex version, it's like, whoa, what do I do then? As you say, you're already getting this heaviness of the label. And then what do you do with that? I mean, I've got this sort of really fixed, complicated thing with lots of letters. So now I've got to then follow all these protocols, and none of them really are generally to do with what you can do for yourself, and it doesn't really offer you any more clarification about what's going on. You're kind of still mystified. Claire Weeks used the word bewildered. You're just bewildered by the state, and you're getting some insight. Like, you might get a label, and that can be helpful. Like, initially labels can be helpful for people because they don't feel so alone. It's like, oh, okay, this makes sense. I'm not crazy. But then what happens from then? It can mean that label becomes fixed or something you attach to. And that can be a barrier for recovery.
Yeah. Well said. And now this very naturally leads to the question of, somebody who's tuning into this who says, yeah, I can really relate to how Samuel is kind of defining anxiety and the process that relates to how, what happened to me. Where, I know this is a very big question, but I'll just ask you, where would you kind of recommend somebody to start, or what do you teach people who are kind of like new clients to you and looking for a way to recover? Where do you start, if you will? Where are some kind of like helpful things to begin this journey?
Yeah, look, there has to be some sort of curiosity. So as you say, someone probably, watching your channel maybe already is aligned to some of the principles, right? Because of the way you talk about sleep. So it's kind of thinking, well, hang on, I've been stuck in this position for a long time. I'm just coping with it. I'm managing it. So I talk about the difference between coping and managing. I've got my structures in place, but again, I'm kind of doing the fingers crossed approach. I'm sick of the suffering. It's not going away. I'm still kind of scared of it. So fear of the fear is something that, in this community, people talk about a lot. What I often say to people as a starting point, there's nothing wrong with your brain. There's nothing wrong with your mind. It's just tired. It's sick of having to worry all the time. But it's just your poor old nervous system is tired. That's all. Everything makes sense if you understand why. So I try and help people in the first stage close off any gaps in their understanding. So give them hope that you can recover. And the good news is you can do it yourself. You don't need me, ultimately. You don't need my channel as much as I'd love you to be dependent on it. You don't need it, ultimately. And you can learn the tools to unlearn the anxiety habit, because that's all it is. It's just this learned habit that you've learned, again, unbeknownst to you most probably, that can be unlearned. Any habit can be unlearned with the right understanding. So it's kind of helping people really shift their mindset about how they view anxiety, that it is just a tired nervous system ultimately. It's all explainable when you look at your life circumstances to help demystify it. And all you really have to do is learn the non-anxiety habit, the non-reactivity habit, and the nervous system will eventually start to let go. Perhaps as it does in sleep, right? It stops treating sleep, for example, as a really big issue. It will stop, with anxiety. It will stop, obsessing about your heart palpitations, all those intrusive thoughts, all the derealization, the weird odd feelings you get that some people get, or this obsessive thinking or the compulsion. It will all eventually fall away the more you unlearn the habit. So it's actually really simple. The whole thing's really simple, but of course it doesn't mean it's easy to then, anytime we've got to form a new habit, there's always going to be discomfort around it. But that's really all it is. It's not complicated. There's no mystery to it. In fact, everything is, what do I often say? Anxiety is a logical and predictable outcome of cumulative stress. So there's nothing complex about it. It's entirely predictable. And if we understand the trajectory of what got us here, we can then kind of almost unlearn our way to recovery.
Yeah. Very, very nicely said. When people ask me, I always start, very similar to you, to say that the first step to me is like just understanding, just like intellectually understanding what's happened is like really foundational. Now, you mentioned how there's like anxiety habits that keep us struggling with anxiety, and then when we leave those habits, things just automatically get easier for us. What can you mention, like some habits that are unhelpful, some anxiety habits?
Do you mean in terms of sort of how people try and cope, or just like what the manifestations of it are, or?
Oh yeah, like basically, I guess the habits that we develop as we try to cope with anxiety that are actually not helping us.
Got it. So one of the big ones that comes to mind is distraction. So a lot of people talk about distraction as a useful tool. I'm fine when I'm busy. It's fine if I'm at work, but then when I come home, then it's like whoa. And interestingly, around sleep, right? Obviously, sleep, you've got to slow down, right? At some point, you've got to slow down and then be with your thoughts. It's like, holy moly, what do I do? So whilst distraction and living your normal life is a really good tool for recovery, it's more about how you're practicing or working through the anxiety. Otherwise, it just becomes a distraction and a coping mechanism to push the anxiety away, to push the symptoms away, to push the fears away. And if you're pushing, suppressing, they will return. And then you've got to deal with it. So distraction is a useful technique if it's done consciously and you're practicing as you're going to the supermarket, as you're working, as you're getting the kids from school, as you're studying. Or really useful, and it's good to have not too much time just sitting around thinking about the state that you're in, but often people use distraction only, or they obsessively exercise to literally, metaphorically and literally run from the suffering. And I did that. I remember the first time I was on a treadmill. It was the first time I'd gotten relief from anxiety. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. But I'm like, well, I can't be running on the treadmill all day because it's burning off adrenaline, right? It's helping the nervous system release the tension, but I didn't really know what was going on. I thought it was a thought problem. So people obsessively exercise, or they madly distract themselves. They might do meditation. Again, all really useful baseline tools or support tools, but that without the understanding, they can then just be coping mechanisms. I'll just do my meditation and I'll do my breathing, but I'm kind of doing this. Please don't come back. And and breathing's good. Hard in a panic attack, I would argue, but these are all not bad tools. But without understanding why you're doing them or what anxiety is, they often just keep people. They don't shift the needle on sensitization. It might drop a little bit. It might go teeter above and below the threshold, so it comes back. They've got to sort of quieten their world down, or work less, or control the externals, if you like, in order to stay okay. So they're all good things, but again, without the understanding, they just become coping mechanisms that don't necessarily lead people out of the state to recovery, where they can be free of it, and they don't have to be so controlled in life. They don't have to worry about hopping on a plane. They can, do it freely. They can go to work freely, and they can deal with it and have the confidence to deal with any symptom or difficult thought, no matter when or where it arises.
Yeah. So nicely said. And I think an interesting point here, and I'll see if you agree with this, is that when you first hear this, you can start to think that, oh, yeah, I've been exercising a lot, and I realized that has been like to try to distract myself, to try to push the anxiety away. And the initial thought may be like, oh, I need to stop exercising, which actually isn't the case, right? It's just that the intent and motivation behind it changes, right? We're no longer exercising to try to push something away. We can exercise and be okay with whatever we're feeling in that moment. Something like that. Would you agree?
Totally. You're right. Exercise is really good, and it does burn off adrenaline, and it does release endorphins and all those sorts of things. But as you say, if it's changing the intent behind it, I'm going to go for a run because I want to go for a run, stay fit and healthy and burn off attention. But then I'll practice with any anxiety that arises before I go for the run, on the run, or anything after.
Yeah.
As well. You mentioned just when I was thinking about these coping techniques, another thing is CBT therapy. I don't know if you know much about that in the States, but cognitive behavioral therapy. It's something in the mainstream, and I've done a couple of videos on it, and it's, again, well intended, right? Because there's some principles that are nice. It's sort of trying to not take anxiety too seriously in one form, but what it does is it requires you to effectively track all your thoughts, counter them with a more positive narrative. And so it's all up here in your mind, and some people then get in a battle with their mind. They're like, well, I've got so many, like thousands of these, these bloody thoughts. How am I going to track them all and then counter them all? And when your body's not feeling any more positive or happy because you don't understand this sensitization thing that I've been talking about, or how the body gets sensitized and what it means and how reactive your nervous system is, then it's frustrating, really frustrating for people, and they try and use it, and they can have some success, but it can just be more of a coping technique, and lead to a lot of frustration.
No, I just 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that. And now, I think we had a really nice discussion about like how we, I can say we, because we use so similar how we view like the anxiety struggle and how to meet that. I wanted to like kind of go back to your story but focus now on how or when did you decide that you wanted to help others with who are struggling this way? How did that happen?
I think it was like one of those light bulb moments. When you're kind of in the dark, bewildered by this state, baffled by what's going on, don't understand it, and then for the first time, you're like, oh my God, maybe this is not serious. Because I always remember during the height of my suffering, I was back in Australia, I was going to my parents, but why am I having these thoughts? Like, they're my thoughts. So why am I having them? Like, there was just some bit of information that I wasn't getting, and I was like trying to figure it out. And so I was, really frustrated by that, but I was kind of close to the answer. And so I was madly Googling, which, I'm sure with sleep, as it is with anxiety, is always a bit of a two-edged sword. It depends what you find, and it can be triggering. But I just needed to find the answers. And that's when I came on to Claire Weeks and her understanding of sensitization and the nervous system. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so there's nothing wrong with my mind. There's nothing wrong with my thoughts. And I sort of knew that. And I think most people who suffer know that. And so they know that on one level, but they can't put the pieces of the puzzle together. So once I started to put the pieces of the puzzle together and then start to practice the tools that I now teach and expand on to really start to allow the very thing we've been scared of for so many years, you just feel so empowered, and you just want everyone to know, because you know what the suffering is like, you know how hellish it is. And so, why wouldn't you just want everyone to know about it? So that's kind of how I came into this work. And that's why I went and did my psych masters, just to understand a bit more, boost my knowledge. Didn't really shift the needle again on anxiety, but, useful, really enjoyed it. But that's why I do what I do, because when you've been there, right? I'm guessing for yourself, it's the same thing from a sleep perspective. Once you've been there, and when you know that the answers and how simple it can be, you just want to share it with everyone.
Yeah, and that part is 100% the same. My journey was a little different than most, I think, in our space have gone through something really difficult themselves, found their way out and help others. For me, it was a little different because I was working as a sleep doctor, and I was actually using like CBT for insomnia.
Yeah,
it's kind of like the primary thing I was taught in school, but realized this isn't helping people. There's something that's off with it, and had this like ongoing, like year after year kind of conversation with my YouTube subscribers, and that led me to really start to understand things. But the motivation is the same. Like, it's so incredible to.
It's like, you had a light bulb moment in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like I had like the outside in journey and some like the inside out journey, but like you arrive at the same place. And how did you start that? Did you start with YouTube, or did you start with like a blog or telling friends, or how did you kind of start?
That's a good question. So when I moved back to Australia, I set up my own corporate because I used to work, in leadership roles in business, corporate world. And so I kind of combined that understanding with my then knowledge of well-being, career, leadership stuff. So I just did a lot of coaching work, primarily in corporate. So you go in and do sort of mental health and well-being session, not sort of related to anxiety, but not really. So bringing in some of the principles, but obviously a lot of people, my audience, were just people that, being forced to go to a lunch and learn session with their employer, hearing me bang on about stress. And so I did so I was in that space. I was kind of dabbling in the related space, if you like, and I just started to do some videos for those clients that do a workshop. And I'm like, watch this video before you come in, before you go into the workshop. So a lot of workplace training, coaching, and then ongoing training sessions. And then I'd bring in a lot of these principles in, and then I really quite enjoyed doing the videos. I found them, quite fun to do and quite cathartic just to talk about it. And then it would just get a bit more traction. And I'm like, oh, okay, so people are finding this really useful. So then I just kept doing it, and then it just sort of builds over time. And I was trying to balance it with all that sort of corporate training and coaching work, which I still do a bit of. And then it's just grown from there, and it's just so nice just to see a community build and people doing really well, people recovering. I'm sure you get the same with people that you work with directly, comments that you get, and you just start to see the benefit people are getting. And then I sort of expand to do some practices, just guided practices, all very simple, all based on the same stuff, just to really sort of help people translate a lot of this work into practice. Because some of this work is like, well, how do I allow anxiety? How do I float through it? That's a common term. How do I face it? How do I accept it? So a lot of the YouTube stuff I found has been helpful to translate it into practice by me showing them what I did.
Yeah,
myself.
Exactly. Wow. So I understand, like, it's kind of very organic. You're producing these videos actually for your corporate clients, but you're putting them out publicly and see that people in the kind of general audience is responding to them. You do more of that. You drift into maybe more of the like direct, like not business to business, but more like direct, directly interacting with people who are struggling with anxiety. And nowadays, are you mostly doing like one-on-one calls, or do you do group calls, or what do you offer?
Yeah, so I do lots of one-to-one coaching still. So I just call it anxiety recovery coaching, and I do masterclasses sort of every now and then. And then it's pretty much just the videos call coaching and masterclasses. And then I still do a lot of just some of the other work that I do, sort of in the corporate world, and just going from there. I'm writing a book at the moment just to kind of put it all into writing and into words, which I think you've got a number of books. So so I probably have to pick your brain on that. I'd love to pick your brain on that. But so just putting it all, just putting it on different platforms and different formats. I've got a little online shop, just so people can download guided practices as well, and look at previous masterclasses, just so that they, the more ways we hear this stuff in different ways, in a longer format, a shorter format, without having to watch a screen sometimes, if you can just put something in your ear, go for a walk, just to really help, just give people, we all learn in different ways, right? Sometimes we want a longer form, we want to sit down, okay, I've just got to get my head around this, or we just want a reminder or a bit of a grab, just to give people different resources. So just kind of responding to whatever people are wanting, really.
Yeah, makes 100% sense. And we'll link to your website in the description so people can find you and study more of your work there. But for now, I'll just say it was really nice connecting with you. And speaking of picking your brain, like you're very welcome to. I'm super happy to tell you everything about like what I've learned about book publishing and everything else. But apart from sharing your wisdom when it comes to anxiety with the community, I also wanted to like connect with you, because it's just nice to connect with people in the same space doing something similar. And I've always had this sense that if we all knew each other, we could like help each other, and we can like collectively help all of us to kind of like reach more people and get this type of approach or framework out to more people. So, and with that said, I just want to say thanks so much for being here, Samuel, and we'll be in touch. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thanks for having me along. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Bye, everyone. Hi, it's me, Daniel, and I hope you found a ton of value in the video that you just watched. But do know that we have more than our free content that can really help you leave insomnia land and arrive at a place of peaceful sleep for the rest of your life. And I know this because I used to work as a sleep doctor and I was frustrated. I used to see patients in clinic, offer education and support, and then I have my patient follow up in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks at best. But I knew that in between our visits, my patients had no support, no guidance, and no help. So I wanted to create something entirely different from that. And this is what went into the Insomnia Immunity program and Bedtime. In both programs, there is a curated curriculum that gives you education in a step-by-step fashion. And there's also a coach that can answer your questions on an ongoing basis. And this was exactly what I wish I had when I was a sleep doctor. And now it's available for you. You can explore more on our website, thesleepcoachschool.com. And if you decide to join, then we can't wait to see you on the other side.